Hello and welcome. My name is Lisa Carter, and I am the principal trainer for the Academy for Corporate Trainers. And for the last almost, I want to say 20 years, I have trained and coached a lot of trainers. And over that time, I found that there are three things that trainers typically have in common. And number one of those things is that as trainers, we absolutely love to see the light and the understanding in our learners' eyes. Number two, we as a group right now, especially right now, are struggling with finding ways to successfully engage our virtual learners. And number three, the result of that struggle is impacting us as trainers, our learners, and our organizations. So I've created this Lunch and Learn to share a tool we at the Academy use, and it's called the Core 4 Framework. This framework was designed to help virtual trainers alleviate the struggle of trying to just figure out how to engage virtual learners. I created this Lunch and Learn so that as trainers, we can begin to feel more confident when we're facilitating virtually. And then finally, I wanted to make sure that we as a group had a tool that we could use to meet the needs of our learners so that they could succeed using the new skills and concepts that we teach. So my goal for this session is to just familiarize you with this Core 4 framework. You will find that it's easy to understand, it's easy to use. Honestly, this is not brain surgery. It is just a framework that you can use to begin to gain some perspective and a practical way to begin implementing a plan to help you, your learners, and your organization to succeed. So I want to go ahead and just jump right in. Um, and I'm going to start off by telling you a quick story about kind of how I begin to put together the information for this framework. So earlier on in my career, I want to say probably a good 15 years ago, I get my dream job. I'm working for this large retailer, and I am so excited. It took like 3, 4 months for me to get this job. I'm super excited and I'm ready to get started. So I'm hired for the job as the new regional sales trainer, and I am just ready to go. So, what I didn't know is that at the same time that they were in the process of hiring me, this retailer had decided to make some really big changes in how they did business. So, the retailer that I thought I was getting a job with was a value brand, and they had been very, very successful as a value brand. What they wanted to do, though, is they wanted to move from the value space to the premium brand space, which meant that there were going to be a lot of things that were going to change. So, as a result of this decision, sales reps who sold products to customers, the way they sold was totally going to change. Their commission structure was going to change, and their bonus structures were going to change. So, my job as the new sales trainer was to facilitate this new sales program, which was going to usher in all of these changes. So I'm excited, right? I have this new job. I'm going to be a part of this major training initiative right out of the gate, which means that I get an opportunity to connect with all 800 of my sales reps and store managers. So I'm totally excited. I'm just ready to go to work. So I do what most of us trainers do, which is I start working my checklist, right? So I just wanted to make sure that I am, practicing my delivery, preparing my icebreakers, my scenarios, my activities, confirming all the details around the training, creating my virtual classroom, loading my PowerPoint. So you guys get it, right? All the things that we as trainers do. So while I am preparing and working through my checklist, the company is busy putting out all these communications around their new sales focus and how amazing it was going to be and all of the amazing changes that were going to happen. And as a result of that communication, the rumor mill got started, right? So the rumor mill in the field with the sales reps and sales managers, market managers, district directors, they were really worried, right? So the rumor mill was like, this new way of selling was going to be like really hard. It was going to be impossible to use. I think the rumor mill also was saying that the reps are going to have to close 2 sales instead of 1 to make the same commission. And the rumor was that bonuses were like basically going to be almost impossible to get, right? So can you at this point see a problem that might be building as it pertains to my ability to engage my learners, right? So I am ready to go. Like I'm excited. All these changes are not really going to affect my pay. So, my biggest worry at that point was if I had enough activities prepared to keep my virtual session from being boring, right? But my learners were worried about their paychecks, right? They were trying to figure out whether they were going to be able to afford gas, rent, childcare. Like they had real life stuff going on and they were stressed out. All right. So as trainers, as we're preparing for training, typically we are focused on, like I said, working our checklist, confirming the dates and the time, preparing our icebreaker, looking to see if we have enough scenarios for, to make the training interesting, right? So we're focused on that. And our learners are focused on this big change that's going to impact their lives, right? So when you look at the problem around virtual training sucking, that's kind of the crux of it, right? Like we as trainers are all excited, we're ready to train, and our learners are like, you know what? My life is working just the way that it is now, and I don't want any change. So what we have to do as trainers is we have to figure out what we're going to do about that gap that exists between our excitement to really engage our learners and teach new skills and new core concepts, and our learners who are just like trying to figure out, man, is this going to totally ruin and wreck my life, right? So I think the best place to start or to go from here is just to level set around engagement and what that really means. So when it comes to engagement, it is not about or only about, I should say, like the icebreakers, the activities, the polls, the breakout rooms. It's really about how we go about gaining our learners' trust. It is about how we inspire our learners to invest their energy into the virtual session. It's about how we focus our learners' interest and then how we motivate them to participate and take responsibility for their own learning experience. So when it comes to helping our learners engage with new concepts and skills, we have to start, right, with addressing any factors that could be standing in their way. So in my earlier scenario, my learners were never going to engage with training, right? They had too many other things going on internally. And these things are things like they weren't going to log into the class and say, Lisa, I'm really upset because I think, that this training is stupid. And I don't think, that I am going to be able to, pay my rent and pay my childcare. They don't log in and tell us those things, right? they log in, and for them, what that lack of engagement looks like is them not taking themselves off mute or not willing to turn on their cameras, right? So those are the ways that we as trainers can see that, there's a gap between where we are and where our learners are. So that brings us to the point of there are so many things that could be going on with our learners. But our job is to focus on what those things are. And because there are so many potentially distracting situations and circumstances, I have created, like I said, this core four framework to help us focus on those core things that are really um, the word I'll use is necessary for us to begin to build a bridge between where we are and where our learners are. So let me go ahead and introduce you to my core four framework. So the core four framework, like I said, not brain surgery, not rocket science, super easy. The first step in the framework is to basically identify and communicate your learners' expectations, or identify and communicate your expectations, to your learner and your business partners. So that's step number one. Step number two is just to discover the common and situational barriers that could be standing between you and your learners. Step number three, create, lead, and maintain the positive energy in your virtual classroom. And then finally, tailor the training to the learners in the room. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and walk you through each of these and just give you an explanation and a definition for each and some examples. So you'll see how it is that we use this framework to build plans that help us build transformative engagement with our virtual learners in our virtual classrooms. So step number one, identify and communicate your expectations to your business partners and your learners. So when our learners log into class, a lot of times they, like I've already said, are willing to take themselves off mute. They don't want to turn on their cameras and they're distracted. Like they just have other things going on. So when I ask myself, why is that? It could be a million reasons, right? It could be due to the company culture. I don't know about you, but I've worked with organizations where the attitude about virtual training is, and you can't see me, but I'm doing little air quotes. The attitude was it's just virtual training, right? It's not real training. So there were expectations and pressures that one, not really training, so not a big deal. And two, we need to get this project done. So go ahead and log in, put yourself on mute and finish the project, right? Another reason is social anxiety around our learners taking themselves off mute or turning on their cameras. It could be that our learners are just feeling insecure in the virtual environment. Like we make assumptions that because of COVID-19 and the switch to, so many of us working virtually, that learners are really comfortable in a virtual environment. And they probably are more comfortable than they've ever been. But think about a virtual classroom. It's a little different. I mean, depending on the virtual platform you use, just sharing your screen could be like an issue, right? So, those are all things that could really be impacting our learners, and we don't know. So let's start with this. Let's start with giving our learners a heads up about what they can expect, right? Have you ever walked into a room and right before you open the door to walk in, you were just a little bit nervous about what was going to be on the other side of that door? Our learners struggle with that too, right? So as a trainer, your first job will be to identify your top expectations with your learners. So things like, how early do you want them to log in? 15 minutes before class or 2 minutes before class? What kind of participation do you expect? How do you expect them to dress? as a virtual trainer, the things that are important to me is that my learners log in 15 minutes early, just in case we have issues. I could care less whether they turn on their camera, right? It's really important to me that my learners show up dressed for a virtual class the same way that they would for a live class. But on the other hand, I could care less whether they eat, right? So you can see that as trainers, we all have different expectations. So your job is to figure out what your expectations are. Step number one. Step number two, communicate those expectations to your business partners. And then step number 2A, and this is so important. If you're taking notes, this is something you need to write down. After you communicate your expectations to your business partners, you need to then ask them to communicate your expectations to their employees who will in the future be your learners, right? So that just shows the learners that you have the support of their managers, right? And it's really kind of important. It's the little steps, it's the incremental things that we do that kind of build up to help our learners understand that when they are in virtual training, that it's real and there are expectations for their behavior and how they need to show up and be prepared to participate, right? So that's step number 2 and 2A. And then step number 3 is now you follow up and communicate your expectations to the learners 2 to 3 days before class. So the reason is, like I said, to give them a heads up of what your expectations are, and then to give them an opportunity to wrap their heads around what it is they need to do. So let's say you have a learner who has, suffers from some type of social anxiety. It's important for you that your learners turn on their camera, but your learner who has social anxiety is just not about the camera, right? So that gives them 2 or 3 days to kind of wrap their heads around, oh my God, I'm going to have to be on camera, or to reach out to you to see if accommodations can be made. So step number 1, not brain surgery, right? But if we just ignore it, now we have set our learners up to fail because they log in and they're thinking, okay, I'm just going to kick back in my chair, stay on mute, take notes and be fine. And your expectation is no, you're going to take yourself off mute. You're going to turn on the camera. You're going to participate. So there is this gap that we as trainers are responsible for closing. And the first step in doing that is to, like I said, identify and communicate your expectations to your business partners and then your learners. All right. So step number 2 is common situations and barriers. So this is kind of meaty. So I'm going to try to keep it as clean as possible as we work through this. So when you think about your learners as a whole, they come to you with this life, and this life is happening, right? They have kids, they have husbands, they have wives, they have projects that they're working on at work. Like they have all these things that are going on in their lives. They have so many things going on. There's no way that you can really consider them all, right? So how do we begin to figure out what are some of the common and situational barriers that they may be facing that is standing in the way of them being able to engage? So step number 2 is of the Core 4 framework is to figure out our learners' common situations and barriers, and then create a plan to help mitigate those barriers, right? So to make that work well, though, we have to be able to put a rope around it. We have to be able to not let that consideration get out of hand. So we look at 4 specific things to begin to understand what their common and situational barriers are. And then we begin to ask the why or the what, and then we start to solve for that. All right. So under common and situational barriers, the first thing that we need to ask ourselves is, what are some of the common fears that our learners may be facing? So in general, learners come to training, whether it's live or virtual, we just this need for psychological safety. And I think we as trainers all know that, right? But there are also fears that are common and situational based on where we work, what the training is, what else is going on in the company. So if we look back at my story, my learners were logging into class feeling all kinds of fear around really critical life stuff for them. So, how are they going to be able to buy gas, pay rent, pay childcare? I'm logging into class. I'm ready to do the really cool icebreaker that I learned at ATD, last month at the conference, right? So we have this really huge gap. My learners are coming in with fear. I'm coming in all positive and excited, and the two are not going to work. So if you want to create transformative engagement within your virtual classroom, you're going to need to understand and plan to address the common and situational fears that your learners face. In my case, right, I had to replace that, really cool icebreaker with a frank discussion. So I had to, put that aside, and I had to just ask my learners, so, hey guys, what have you heard about the new sales training program? I had to actively listen to what they had to say, and I actually took notes, right? So I'm sitting there, I'm having this conversation with my learners. And after they shared with me, how they were feeling, then I circled back and I addressed with my learners what was true about what they thought about the sales training and what was not true. And then I asked for their permission to let me show them how they were going to use this new sales program, to make them at the very least the same commission, but hopefully a lot more, right? So they had this fear. And it was my job to address that fear before we ever started, before I ever started trying to build engagement and, train those learners. So fear is a really critical factor. And just think, in a virtual classroom, again, our learners' common fear could just be, oh God, I have to manage, sharing my screen or taking myself off mute, or, uh, using the little icon to raise my hand. So all of those things are things that we can consider as it pertains to what do our learners fear, or what is a common fear that they may have, and then what can I do to help bridge the gap between where they are and where I'd like them to be. The second step in the process of trying to figure out what our learners' common situational barriers are is our attitude, is our learners' attitudes, right? So in my scenario, I shared my learners, were afraid, and they had an overwhelming negative attitude about this new sales training program, right? And I knew that they did because I was hearing the rumor. So my question to you is, what attitudes are your learners bringing into your virtual classroom? And then what are you planning to do to bridge the gap, right? Because, if your learners come into your classroom, they're coming in three ways, with basically three ways, right? With a positive attitude, a neutral attitude, or a negative attitude. And so it's your job to start building your awareness around where your learners are, and then build a plan to either leverage the positive or neutral attitude to enhance engagement, or have a plan to mitigate the negative attitudes so that you can build the type of engagement you need to build so that your learners can have this engaged experience and take it to the next level. Okay. And doing this is not hard. Like, this is just a matter of observing or asking, or, talking to people within the company to kind of start getting a feel for what the attitude is around the training. And then once you start gaining information, you can start building a plan or a response to leverage or mitigate your learners' attitudes. All right. So again, common and situational attitudes that your learners may have. Step number 3, under trying to figure out their common situational barriers, is just understanding, you know, what their beliefs are, right? So our learners come into class and they have like these secret beliefs. And typically these beliefs are around themselves, the training, and you. And those beliefs are going to impact their willingness to engage. So if we go back again to my scenario, my learners believed like 100% that the training that I was about to uh, teach them was bad for them. They believed that this training was going to make it hard for them to do what they do, to do it well, and to make enough money to support their family. So, how much engagement was really going to be possible with my learners coming in the room with that belief? So, when you're preparing to deliver training, you must have an idea about what your learners believe. Um, and if you want to know what they believe, listen to what they say, observe what they do, observe how they participate in class. Start learning about the beliefs around the training based on responses that you get from your level 1 evaluation, right? So, what are your learners saying about you? Because again, they have beliefs about themselves, they have beliefs about the training, and they have beliefs about you. In my case, I was a brand new trainer. They didn't know me. I was basically at the bottom of the barrel. And that's where their belief about me stayed until I was able to begin proving that I was competent and understood where they were coming from and started meeting them where they were, right? So, why are our learners not engaging? Our learners are not engaging in part because they have these secret beliefs about stuff. Like I said, about themselves, about the training, and about us as trainers. So, again, our job is to be aware of what those beliefs are and then begin to address them. And then finally, under common situational barriers that we need to be aware of, is the actual barriers. So when I talk about barriers, I'm talking about the circumstances that have a negative impact on our learners' ability to engage. So circumstances would equal, for instance, where are your learners located when they log in for class? So in my case, my learners, and I didn't know this at the time, but my learners were logging in from the back of a retail space in break rooms all over Southern California on old laptops and headphones. And I don't know if you're aware, but they actually sell headphones like 100 in a box for like, $5. So they're in a break room where people are clocking in and out, coming in and out, talking about what they're going to do for the weekend. And then you have, sales reps sitting there trying to focus and engage. That's a barrier to engagement, right? I've also been in situations where I had like 20, 25 learners in a room with one laptop. They had the conference line on muted, and their big plan for training was to have all 20 to 25 people in that room to just sit back and listen to me train, right? That is not conducive to engagement. So, as trainers, when we understand the barriers or the circumstances that our learners are facing, it gives us an opportunity to kind of work behind the scenes to kind of mitigate those circumstances. So if I had known that my sales reps were going to be sitting in the back of a retail space in a break room, I would have just sent out a communication saying, hey, it's important that you allow your learners to be in a space where they are not going to be distracted, where they can close the door and have some quiet so that they can fully engage in this new and critical training that they're going to need to be successful on that sales floor. But nobody thought about it, right? And that's where we as trainers can come in and not only have these, consider these things for ourselves to help our learners engage, but how we can begin to help our organization overall just plan better, right? So, these are the things that we need to look at when it comes to engaging our learners. We need to understand the common and situational barriers they face. And if we use the FAB structure, so asking ourselves what common and situational fears they face, attitudes they have, beliefs they have, and barriers that they're facing. If we just use that structure to ask the right questions, we can begin to get a picture of what we can do to begin to help our learners engage. All right. So that is step number 2 of the Core 4 framework. Step number 3, creating, leading, and maintaining the positive energy in our virtual classrooms from the first minute through to the last. Okay. So again, I'm going to just go back to the question, why are our learners not engaging with training? Because we do not have a plan to create, build, and maintain the positive energy in our classrooms from the first minute to the last. So when I talk about building the positive energy in our virtual classroom, it absolutely starts right with our vocal variety. So, the energy, the inflection, the tone, the rate, the speed, the pitch that you use to build interest and guide your learners. So that's like the first step. It's the one that we're most familiar with and the one that we typically spend the most time developing. But there's a whole second step. And the second step is maintaining it. Like once you are building this positivity in that room, how do you maintain it? So some things to consider when it comes to maintaining the positivity in your virtual room is this. How will you give developmental feedback to your learners during class? Because if you blow that, all of the positivity that you built will start to erode. How will you correct a learner who gives you the wrong answer? If you don't do that correctly, again, you're going to start eroding that positivity. How do you manage, and I am again using my little air quotes, how do you manage the personalities in the room, right? There's always that one person who wants to be you, right? So, how will you manage a learner who is stressing about the technical challenge of just sharing their screen? How are you going to manage when you're on the 5th day of a 5-day virtual training? God forbid, but it happens, it does. These are 8-hour trainings, you're exhausted. And all you want to do is just hurry up and finish this training. And you find yourself just like on automatic drive, like your voice just goes into monotone. And, so what do you do when you're exhausted and you don't even know that you slipped into this monotone voice that has absolutely no energy, right? So when it comes to creating and leading the energy in the room, I think most of us kind of have that down. But do we have a plan to maintain it? For me, I'll just give you a quick example. If I'm correcting a learner who gave a wrong answer, I don't want to be in the moment with that learner trying to figure out, oh my God, so how am I going to give them feedback so it doesn't sound like I'm slapping their hand? I don't want to have to try to figure that out in the moment, right? So I use, just a 3-step, I think in frameworks, guys. So I use a framework where when my learner gets the wrong answer, I will ask them to show me or tell me how they came up with the answer. I will acknowledge that, hey, I understand, how you came to that answer. Or if I totally don't get it, I'll say something like, oh, okay, got it. And then the third thing that I do is just ask for permission to share with them the right answer or how to get to the right answer. So that's a framework that I carry in my head. It's the same framework I use all the time. I may have to adjust it. If I'm training software, I might have to adjust it a little bit versus if I am training sales, but that framework is still there, right? So our job as trainers is to figure out how we are going to not just create and lead it, but maintain that positivity in our virtual classrooms from the first minute to the last. So this is the deal. If we are not prepared to create, lead, and maintain that positive energy in our virtual classrooms, we're going to end up with learning environments that erode our learners' trust, their energy, their interest, and their participation, right? So it is really important that we as trainers have a concrete plan for how we're going to, one, identify anything that can happen in that classroom that could erode the positivity, and then two, having a plan to deal with that up front. All right. So that, I believe, is step number 3 in the core 4. And the last step in the core 4 is just the ability to tailor the training to the learners in the room. So if you will do this, it will help with resistant learners. It will help ensure that the content is relevant to the learners in the room. And I guarantee you 100%, it will begin to build transformative engagement with your virtual learners. So again, going back to my original scenario, learners were fearful of losing income. They had a negative attitude. They believed that training was hard and wouldn't work. And I knew all this because I did my homework, right? I investigated what their fears were, what their attitudes were, what their beliefs and what their barriers were. Well, I didn't do so good a job on the barriers piece, if I'm 100% honest. But, I did do some homework, right? So when my learners logged in, I knew what their problems and challenges were. So when it comes to tailoring the training to the learners in the room, and the key piece of that is not just tailoring the training, but also the key piece is to the learners in the room. I had to figure out how to take that a generic sales training that was meant for everybody in the entire enterprise and tailor every concept and skill and activity to the learners in my room. So I just, found out what they felt their biggest problems and challenges were, right? Because we had that discussion. I wrote that down. And as I'm training the new skills, as I'm training the new concepts, I am connecting those to the training, right? So when my learners logged out, I'm gonna be honest with you, they weren't overjoyed. Like they weren't like, oh my God, Lisa, you're just so amazing. I got some of that a little bit later after the things that I taught them started working. But you may find that depending on your learner, that they may not be overjoyed when they log out of your classroom. But if you have made sure that you've connected those skills and concepts to the problems and the challenges that they need to solve on the job every day, not only will your learners really transform and grow, but your reputation as a trainer will learn and grow, and your overall organization will learn and grow. All right. So step number 4 and the final step to the core 4 framework for building transformative engagement for your virtual learner is to tailor the training to the learners in the room. So the core 4 framework represents like 90% of where we need to be. other 10% is where we as trainers have a tendency to live. It is not a part of the core four. I didn't include it because this is kind of what we do all the time anyway. Like, this is where we focus. The other four things, most of the time, even if we think about it, we just don't do anything about it. But we do, however, almost 100% of the time spend 99.99999% of our energy figuring out which poll or video or game we're going to use, how we're going to organize our breakout rooms, how much time are we going to give them to process. Like, this is kind of where we as trainers live. So I had to include this because it is so important. Like, we do have to have the right tools, because the right tools will help support all of the other work that we're doing in our classroom. So I want to share with you just a quick four things that I think are important around choosing the right tools. I consider these four things to be total Lisa-isms. So, embrace them if they work for you. If they don't work for you, do what it is you do now and just, move on. So in terms of choosing the right tools, I would suggest that, one, you have enough of a variety of tools so that they meet the auditory, visual, and kinesthetic needs of your learners, right? You want to make sure that people just have an opportunity to put their hands on it, to think about it, to listen to it, to see whatever it is that you are teaching. At the Academy, we use a what we call an activity matrix, and it just allows the learners to fill in their activities and just have a visual around seeing, oh, okay, I have 5 activities, 4 of them, focus on visual and auditory learners, and we have nothing for our hands-on or kinesthetic learners. So it's a super simple little thing, but it is very helpful in terms of your planning. Step number 2 in choosing the right tool is determining whether the activity or poll or video game or hands-on demo, does it move your training forward? Does it help to move your learner forward? Step number 3, we need to make sure that the tool or the activity deploys well in a virtual environment. I would suggest that you test it. So I don't know about you, but typically I'm handed training content that we used to use or that we use for live training. If you try to take that training content and the activities and scenarios or whatever that are included in that content and try to um, facilitate those without checking to see how they worked in a virtual environment, you might find yourself with confused learners, and you then again start to kind of erode your engagement with your learners. So that's number 3. And then number 4 is just making sure that you can confidently facilitate the use of the tool or the activity. So keep it simple. So if you're teaching traditional classroom training, you might be able to do a complicated activity that's like 10 steps, right? If you're in a virtual classroom, please keep it simple, 5 steps or less. Unless you really are comfortable in that virtual classroom, you know that you can articulate clearly what you need your learners to do and have a way to communicate that. I would just keep it very, very simple, right? So when it comes to choosing the right tools, the last thing that I kind of want to just say about that in terms of the importance of it is when we choose our tools wisely, they support the learning, right? And they help us see if the concepts and skills that we are sharing with our learners are actually resonating with them, right? If they can answer all of the poll questions correctly, or if at the end of time that you've given them to process the new information, if they come back into the classroom and we can have a discussion, then we know that that tool is, we can see or use that tool to help us see that what we're teaching is really resonating with our learners. So in terms of the tools, super important, but we have to do that 90% first. All right. And again, as we begin to wrap up, that 90% is identifying and communicating our expectations to our business partners and our learners, discovering the common and situational barriers that our learners are facing, creating, leading and maintaining the positive energy in our virtual classrooms, and then tailoring the training to the learners in the room. So again, those are the top four. If you want to make sure that your virtual training does not suck, those are the core four things that you need to identify and plan for to work with as you plan to facilitate training for your learners. All right. So if you are dreading it every time you are scheduled for virtual training, please use this framework to help you understand your virtual learners, create a plan, and support your goal to build, like I said, transformative and engaging um, training for your virtual learners, and so that you can be the superstar trainer that I know that you are. So everybody, I just want to say thank you for joining me today on this Lunch and Learn. I hope that you were able to get something from this. And I am going to go ahead and in the training. If you would like to drop off the call, feel free to do that. If you'd like to stay, I'm going to give everybody 15 or 20 minutes, or I'm sorry, 15 to 20 seconds to drop off. Anybody remaining, I'm going to open up the line and I will just field questions until the top of the hour. So thank you for coming.